Tonight, that bizarre California kidnapping case takes a chilling new turn. Is the man charged with abducting a young girl 18 years ago also a serial killer? I'm Harry Smith, also tonight paying final respects to Senator Kennedy. Tens of thousands slowly file past the casket, and members of the Kennedy family are there to thank them. And children of Katrina, they survived the hurricane, but 4 years later, their wounds have not yet fully healed.
We actually saw a man who was holding his daughter in his hand, and she just died in his hand, so it made me feel bad.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie is off tonight. The story was already strange enough. An 11-year-old girl kidnapped 18 years ago in California suddenly reappears, and the couple who allegedly took her are charged with 29 counts of forcible abduction, rape, and false imprisonment. Now a new turn. Police searched the couple's home for evidence in the murders of several prostitutes. John Blackstone has the latest on the investigation and how officials missed chances to break the case.
Across a neighbor's fence, the secret backyard prison seems to be a jumble of tents and trash. It is here that for 18 years, J.C. Dugard was held captive, and apparently where she gave birth to 2 children. Damon Robinson lives next door.
It reminds you of the Hannibal Lecter-like deal. It's like creepy.
What lay behind the house on Walnut Avenue was kept from view by thick shrubs, tall trees, and solid fences. Entered through a narrow gap hidden by a tarp, there was a secret second backyard, a crude prison. There, investigators found a series of sheds and tents they say were strategically arranged to prevent any contact with the world beyond. Chillingly, one of the sheds was completely soundproof, with a door that could be opened only from the outside. There were 2 tents, a rudimentary outdoor toilet, and a shower of the kind used for camping. J.C.'s accused captors, 58-year-old convicted sex offender Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy, have been charged with kidnapping, taking J.C. from a bus stop in 1991. Garrido is also charged with rape. Police believe he fathered J.C.'s 2 daughters, the firstborn when J.C. was just 14. Garrido spoke of the girls, now aged 11 and 15, in a phone call from jail.
Those 2 girls, they slept in my arms every single night from birth. I never touched them.
The county sheriff admitted today a worried neighbor warned his department about Garrido 3 years ago.
The caller also said that Garrido was psychotic and had a sexual addiction.
The neighbor also reported people were living outside, but the deputy who investigated never looked in the backyard.
We are beating ourselves up over this and will continue to do so.
The secret prison was also missed by a parole officer supervising the convicted sex offender with home visits as often as 3 times a month. On Monday, Garrido showed up on the Berkeley campus of the University of California handing out religious literature. A campus police officer became suspicious when she saw the 2 young girls with him. She checked his identity and reported him to his parole officer, who investigated and arrested Garrido on Wednesday. Those who knew Garrido now understand why his behavior was unusual.
What I thought was strange that he would never let us go to his house. Even if you went and picked him up, he would come running out. He says, don't come to the door, I'll come to you.
J.C., now 29, appears to have made no effort to escape.
It's typical not to say anything.
They're under such control.
They're under such control. Their minds have been controlled. They have been told all these lies, and they obey.
Overseeing his backyard prison here in the past few years, Garrido became a religious zealot. He kept a blog on which he claimed that God spoke directly to him through a special box. Harry?
John Blackstone, thanks. In Boston, family and close friends of Senator Edward Kennedy gathered at the John F. Kennedy Library for a private memorial service this evening. Vice President Biden is among the speakers. Earlier, members of the family personally thanked the many thousands of people from all over the country who filed past the casket to pay their respects. Here's national correspondent Jim Axelrod.
They all got their few seconds to say goodbye to Ted Kennedy. 70,000 people in 2 days. A Boy Scout troop. a senior citizen in a wheelchair, 2 women carrying a farewell message. Angela Sanfilippo from the fishing community of Gloucester, Massachusetts, waited 2.5 hours for her few seconds.
Okay.
Not so bad?
No, not for 40 years of the loving care that I received from the senators.
She brought her treasured snapshots inside and a heart full of gratitude for Kennedy's help fighting for fishermen's rights and in helping Sanfilippo find treatment for her disabled brother.
It was peaceful. It was very peaceful. And what I said to him was just, peace be with you and see you in paradise.
Kennedy family members greeted the mourners, his son Patrick, his widow Vicki. It was hard to tell who got more from the handshakes, the mourners or the Kennedys.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply comforting.
13 condolence books were set up in the parking lot. When Jude Fokoum from Cameroon was a student in the U.S., his government's red tape delayed his tuition money. Kennedy called Cameroon's president and solved the problem.
Nobody will do that. I just picked up my phone, called him because somebody introduced me to him, and he just took it from there.
With the public viewing now over, the Kennedys want a lighter-hearted celebration of the senator's life at the memorial tonight. A chance for friends and family to share some stories and have some laughs. Harry?
Jim Axelrod in Boston. Thanks. Peter Canellos is editorial page editor of the Boston Globe, and he edited a Globe biography of Senator Kennedy called Last Lion, The Fall and Rise of Ted Kennedy, and he joins us this evening. Peter, good evening.
Thank you.
What are you hearing about what is going to happen to the senators, to Kennedy's Senate seat?
I think that the first question is whether there'll be an interim appointment, and I think that's likely to happen. But then there'll be an election, and we'll have several candidates, probably somebody from the Kennedy family. There's speculation about Joe Kennedy or perhaps even his widow, Vicki. There also are 3 congressmen and the state's attorney general, all possible candidates.
I think the thing that struck so many of us over the last couple of days is hearing these individual testimonials from folks far and wide, powerful and powerless, who the senator intervened in their lives in such dramatic fashion. He was an old-fashioned retail politician.
Absolutely, and he got that from his grandfather, Honey Fitz, the former mayor of Boston, who took him through the streets of the city, to barbershops, to bars, taught him how to really get to know people, and so there's a deep personal connection between him and the people of Massachusetts.
Peter Canellos from the Boston Globe, thanks.
Thank you.
In California today, the governor declared an emergency in 2 counties where wildfires are burning out of control. The worst of them are around Los Angeles. A fast-moving fire in Rancho Palos Verdes, south of the city, forced hundreds of people to evacuate. Now a bigger fire north of there is threatening hundreds of homes. Sandra Hughes is on the scene tonight.
In La Cañada, Flint Ridge, 12 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles, 70-foot flames are scorching hillsides above homes. A massive smoke plume can be seen for miles.
Right now, it's pretty much out of control. It's running where it wants to run.
900 homes are under voluntary evacuation orders, including Bill Johnson's. How close have the flames gotten to your house, would you say, Bill?
Well, if I had marshmallows, I could probably make some s'mores.
But because of the air support, he's not leaving.
See how accurate these guys are at dumping that?
Wow.
They're so good.
This is what firefighters have to contend with. Superheated flames burning through bone-dry brush. Triple-digit temperatures and low humidity make it even more difficult for firefighters to gain the upper hand. The flames that last night exploded in the affluent coastal community of Rancho Palos Verdes have now calmed. The 1,500 evacuees allowed home. It was the air assault that made the difference. Only 230 acres burned.
We had helicopters that were either dropping 300, 400, or 1,000 gallons in each drop. That was critical for getting that containment.
Miraculously, only an outbuilding and a gazebo were destroyed. 6 homes sustained minor damage. Back in La Cañada, where no homes have burned, Susan and Arnold Graham are packed up and ready to go.
If it takes a run up this canyon, it'll come right over and jump quite a distance, if the wind blows particularly.
Now, the good news is that high winds that could push these flames into the neighborhoods are not in the forecast. And it's predicted this weekend that temperatures should drop slightly. The bad news is that the dry conditions are going to persist. Harry.
Sandra Hughes in Southern California tonight. Thank you. There are now more than 60,000 Americans fighting in Afghanistan, and as the number of troops there has swelled, so has the number of soldiers and Marines killed in action. In eastern Afghanistan today, an American soldier was killed by a roadside bomb. That brings the U.S. death toll for August to 46, surpassing July now as the deadliest month of the war. CBS News correspondent Cami McCormick was riding in the same Army vehicle as the soldier and was seriously wounded. Cami, who was 47, underwent emergency surgery at a field hospital and was then taken to Bagram Air Base for further treatment. She is in stable condition. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, 4 years later, some of the youngest survivors of Hurricane Katrina are still struggling. As Tropical Storm Danny slowly heads north, a search is on for a boy who disappeared today in rough waters off the North Carolina coast. The boy, who was 12, was bodyboarding. Danny's top winds are 40 miles an hour. Forecasters expected to brush by the northeast tomorrow, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and dangerous surf. 4 years ago today, a storm named Katrina was set to slam into the Gulf Coast. When it did, the death and destruction were horrific. It killed more than 1,600 people. That's why small signs of recovery, like the opening of a high school health clinic in St. Bernard Parish today, mean so much. But for many of the youngest survivors of Katrina, the wounds have not yet healed. Here's Chief National Correspondent Byron Pitts.
4 years after Hurricane Katrina, survivors will tell you,
I'm gonna die. The water is steady rising in the attic. Where's FEMA? Where's the mail?
the events of that day and the days after were both horrifying and haunting.
It was walking on dead bodies, and we actually saw a man who was holding his daughter in his hand, and she just died in his hand. So it made me feel bad, and I started crying, and I started worrying about my little sisters and brothers.
How does a young person process that kind of stuff, seeing things like that?
At the time, I didn't want to process it.
But for these New Orleans high school students, the lingering scar of Hurricane Katrina isn't what happened 4 years ago, it's what hasn't happened 4 years later.
I live in the 9th Ward. Like, I have to go to school, travel 7 miles every day, and I see the 9th Ward is still the same.
In fact, just 2,600 of the 14,000 residents who lived in the lower 9th Ward before Katrina have returned. While much of New Orleans is getting back to normal, the areas hardest hit still struggle, especially the children.
It makes me mad sometimes.
Experts say getting over the mental trauma of a disaster like Hurricane Katrina normally takes about 3 years. But as New Orleans closes in on a 4th anniversary, health officials believe it could take children and adults here 3 times longer to heal from their psychological wounds.
Our young people here in New Orleans were forced to face a very adult situation, and it's had some consequences.
Never mind, we got it.
4 years ago, we first met Dr. Juliette Saucy, director of New Orleans EMS, outside the city's convention center. She and her team ankle deep in water, chest deep in a healthcare system that was overwhelmed and broken. Today, she says, it's the mental health system that's busted, and children here are paying for it.
A lot of experimenting with substance abuse, a lot of self-medication, a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs.
According to a 2007 study, it's estimated that there are 45,000 children in the city that have some kind of mental health problem. This year alone, there have been 40 suicides among adults and children, the youngest person 11 years old.
Anybody that knows anything about children knows that the best case scenario is to have children in a supportive environment for any kind of treatment.
Yeah, my name is Tyrone Smith and I'm 13 years old.
We first met an emotional Tyrone Smith 7 days after he was forced to evacuate to Baton Rouge.
And I have lost my house, my dogs. It's just been horrible.
Now a junior in high school, Tyrone credits his parents and counseling for helping him.
Katrina changed everything in an instant.
That's a tough lesson for a kid to learn.
Yep, but I've learned it, so Now I value everything.
Earlier this year, the Smiths moved back to their home, which was once under 5 feet of water.
So how's life for you now? Great. Back with my family, back with my friends, made new friends.
Back home, in a city that is slowly putting the pieces back together. Byron Pitts, CBS News, New Orleans.
From CBSMoneyWatch.com tonight, another hopeful sign for the economy. The government reports consumer spending rose 0.2% in July as the Cash for Clunkers program gave car sales a boost. In fact, a Ford executive predicted today that overall car sales will be up this month for the first time in more than 2 years. More people turned in their clunkers for Toyota Corollas than any other car. But soon, the best-selling car in history will not be made in the United States. Toyota announced today it will shut its California factory, cutting 4,600 jobs after GM ended its partnership at the plant. Ben Tracy has more.
We are new me. Auto workers in Fremont, California tried to appear upbeat today, but they couldn't escape the sobering news. Toyota is following GM and pulling out of town.
Shock, sadness, hurt, all the things wrapped up into one.
For 25 years, the new United Motor Manufacturing Plant, or NUMMI, has served two of the world's biggest automakers. NUMMI is the largest employer in town. Those 4,600 jobs, paying an average of $65,000, will be lost when the plant is idled in March. That could also be an economic earthquake for all of California, where the unemployment rate is nearly 12%. 1,200 suppliers here produce parts for NUMMI. That's at least 19,000 additional jobs. Walker Corporation makes small metal parts for cars. It stands to lose $6 million in sales and is considering layoffs.
It's on the table. We've got to look at it. We still don't know what the fallout's going to be.
NUMMI's troubles began in June when bankrupt GM stopped making cars at the plant. Toyota, also burned by the bad economy, cannot run the facility on its own.
They got so big and the crash became so severe that as a big player, Toyota has a lot to lose.
So Toyota will now shift production of its Tacoma pickup to San Antonio, Texas, while the Corolla heads to Canada and Japan. Lawmakers are scrambling to try to keep Toyota in California, but it's likely too little too late as the pain in the auto industry moves west. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Coming up next, they weren't fellow senators, but they worked with Ted Kennedy on Capitol Hill. We'll hear their stories in a moment. After the funeral in Boston tomorrow, the body of Senator Kennedy will be taken to Arlington National Cemetery, where he will be buried near the graves of his brothers John and Robert. On the way to the cemetery, the hearse will stop at the Capitol so people who work there and knew Kennedy so well can say goodbye. Here's Nancy Cordes.
I would go office to office. And
Michael Johnson was a Capitol Hill paperboy in 1966 when a young Senator Kennedy made him a proposition.
I was a little rough around the edges as a kid. He sort of picked up on that and he said, look, why don't you bring me your report card and let me see your report card every semester, and for every A you get, I will give you $1.
From that day on, he earned so many A's, Johnson got into an Ivy League university, Cornell.
It's all hands on deck. But
today, he heads up the Senate's emergency preparedness efforts.
He would just literally be there looking at my report card or saying, what about this C here? Now, you got to get this up here, Mike. This is not, we need to work on this one.
Chuck, thanks very much for coming on.
It is a fact both accepted and marveled at here on Capitol Hill. The Senate's most famous member was also the most approachable.
I met him in 1962.
Bertie Bowman has worked on the Hill for 60 years. He was there when Kennedy arrived, helping to move him into his new office.
I was surprised when I saw him again. Bertie, he said. He didn't forget Bertie.
Kathy,
he never forgot a name.
Politics was his profession as well as his life, and a really good politician remembers names and faces.
But after bumping into Kennedy for 13 years, as you walk through here, tour guide Martha Gabriel is convinced politics was only part of it.
He was just personable. He just had something that came out of him that just loved people. and I was drawn by that.
He didn't distinguish whether you was the vice president or the president versus his newspaper boy. He would literally have an interest in all of the people that were in the circles of his life.
And for those lucky enough to be in those circles, it could literally be a life changer. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
That's the CBS Evening News. Jeff Glor will be here tomorrow night. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 Eastern Time with CBS News live coverage of Senator Kennedy's funeral. For Katie Couric, I'm Harry Smith. Thank you for joining us, and good night.